From the beginning. Amen. If we are not brutal about diagnosing what we are up against, then all of our resistance is futile. If you read the writings of anthropologists, there are studies about how civilizations break down, and we are certainly following that pattern. Unfortunately, there's nothing within human nature to argue that we won't go down the way other civilizations have gone down. The difference is now, of course, that when we go down, the whole planet is going to go with us. Yet you rebel not only for what you can achieve, but for who you become. In the end, those who rebel require faith. Not a formal or necessarily Christian, Jewish, or Muslim orthodoxy, but a faith that the good draws to it the good. That we are called to carry out the good insofar as we can determine what the good is. And then we let it go. The Buddhists call it karma, but faith is the belief that it goes somewhere. By standing up, you keep alive another narrative. It's one of the ironic points of life. That, for me, is what provides hope. And if you are not there, there is no hope at all.
It is this point in the service that we would normally collect the offering, but in lieu of the situation that we find ourselves in, we will not be passing the collection plates. Instead, the 2 wooden collection offertory bowls are out in the gathering place on the old Universalist altar where the Book of Joys and Sorrows sits. We invite you to place your offerings in the offering bowls where they have been collected. We know that we give to this place each week for the same reasons that we lay stones in the cairn, for celebration, for remembrance, and for this community that we treasure. And we appreciate your gifts of time, treasure, and presence today. Please join me in singing in the Teal hymn book, the hymn 1051, We Are. accept the gifts that are placed in the offertory bowls and dedicate ourselves to the mission of this church, that we will be a people of helping hands, open minds, loving hearts who show up. And I should say particularly thank you to those of you who showed up today to make coffee, to place hymnals, to unexpectedly be asked to lead hymns, and in all other roles. Thank you for being those who show up.
My biology teacher in high school was amazing. Wally Good was his name. As a teacher, he was brilliant and funny. Mr. Good challenged us. He would not let me refuse to stick my hand into that huge jar of wiggling fat earthworms and pull one out, even though I really was grossed out for days, just as I assured him I would be. Every spring he organized 2 weekend field trips to Bennett Springs, Missouri, where we stayed overnight in the park lodge and went exploring in caves. Not just 1, but 2 trips. He deliberately scheduled a second for prom weekend so that kids who weren't going to prom could just be out of town. I loved Mr. Good. We all loved Mr. Good. But I hated biology class. Science bored me. It was the only high school class I ever got a C in. So fast forward to one Sunday morning about 35 years later, I had a Sunday off and decided to go worship at All Souls in Kansas City, my home congregation. The service begins, and the worship leader invites us to turn to the person sitting next to us and greet them. So I turn to the stranger sitting to my right, who's already smiling and extending his hand. "Hi," he says, "I'm Wally Good." And totally forgetting my ministerial presence, I do like this little shriek, like, ah! Seriously, I like some sort of frenzied fangirl. I start babbling, oh my God, Mr. Good, you were my biology teacher in high school. Oh, you were just the best. Oh, going to Bennett Springs was so incredible. And it was the only class I ever got a C in. Just then the music starts. The choir begins to sing, and we all turn back toward the front. And I can sense that somehow I've disturbed Mr. Good. Several times during transitions in the service, he leans over and whispers worried questions to me. After the chalice lighting, was the class boring? During the offering, did you ever ask me for extra help? Right before the sermon, how could I have made it more interesting for you? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know, it was 35 years ago. I was just passionate about the humanities, I guess, and I'm really wishing I hadn't said that about the sea. Needless to say, we had a very long discussion in the lobby afterwards. He'd always be a teacher, and to him, apparently, I was still worthy of teaching. This is a story from my life to illustrate that my knowledge of the complexities of science is somewhat lacking. But I believe in science. What we know about the universe, its origins, and how it works is ever evolving. Of course, we don't know what we don't know yet. So my hope is always to stay open-minded about what might be the nature of ultimate reality, letting my own life experience inform me. My own life experience includes listening to other people's reflections and interpretations and challenges to my own perspectives. So my beliefs grow and change, yet so far, no experience has led me to trust what science proves is not real. The concept of God is a tough one. I feel pretty safe in saying that the traditional meaning of the word God, as understood today by most Americans, is one that is not supported by modern science. That's the anthropomorphic male God, who's eternal, who created the universe, who created us, who's all-powerful, and can intervene in human history on a whim, or when earnestly requested to help you find that perfect parking spot, make sure that the good guys win, whether we're talking about football or elections or war, or reward your superior goodness relative to that of your neighbors by deciding exactly where the tornado will or won't touch down. And I've also grown increasingly aware that a lot of people freely and comfortably use God language without meaning anything of the kind, and find the word spiritually meaningful and powerful. Not only Unitarian Universalists, but a lot of liberal Christians and Jews and others. We're not aware of that other meaning so much because the public conversation assumes the traditional meaning and doesn't challenge or counter it. It seems to me that a lot is lost when we just reject the word as superstition or delusion. We sacrifice centuries of wisdom and spiritual power if inclusion of the G word renders all of that meaningless. So I had begun to understand God as representing something like the spirit of life and love and compassion and justice and creativity that's part of each of us. But that God, of course, is a metaphor. Not that metaphors aren't powerful, but I want to explore the question posed by Nancy Abrams in her book, A God That Could Be Real, when she says, for her the key question is, for those whose beliefs are filtered through a scientific lens, which describes not all of us, but many of us, could anything actually exist in this universe that is worthy of being called God? Actually exist. So neither the liberal metaphorical God nor the traditional supernatural God. And her answer is yes, which intrigues me as Adams has quite the scientific street cred. Besides being a lawyer, a Fulbright scholar with a degree in history and philosophy of science from the University of Chicago, she's also married to Joel Premack, who's a professor of physics at the University of California in Santa Cruz, whose fields of study are quantum field theory and particle astrophysics. I'm sure some of you know what all that means. He's best known for co-authoring the theory of cold dark matter. And Abrams is co-inventor of a procedure called scientific mediation that lets government agencies make intelligent policy decisions in areas where the relevant science is crucial yet controversial. She's consulted on the use of scientific mediation with state governments, corporations, foreign governments, though not, I believe, with the current U.S. government, as she's a scientist and not a miracle worker. As an atheist and a scientist and fascinated by cosmology, Abrams wasn't interested in a God that had to be believed in, nor presumably a metaphorical God. If there were going to be a God in her life, that God had to be objectively real in a way that matter and gravity and culture are real. Her consideration of this question originated with a little experiment, one of those mind games we sometimes play with ourselves, when she was suffering from an eating disorder and decided to attend a 12-step program. Of course, she came right up against the requirement to turn her life over to a higher power of her understanding, which she heard as a requirement not to just blow it off as an atheist, but to make the effort to develop her own understanding. And one day she found herself, as one sometimes does, confronted unexpectedly with a long, beautiful, bountiful buffet line. And rather than white-knuckling her way through that temptation, she tried acting as if she believed in a higher power and spoke to it, fully realizing she was just speaking to some part of her own mind as though it were separate. And that worked for her. For the first time, Abrams was able to just walk away, no longer even tempted. Now, she had no illusion that she was talking to anything outside herself, but she was just imagining a loving, not to be deceived witness to her thoughts. This kept working for her, so clearly there was some aspect of her consciousness that was better able to control her behavior than her default consciousness, whenever she conjured it up as a higher power. So she arrived at the obvious conclusion that this power was her own higher self, and it was that self that she wanted to be in control. And that was the moment when it all stopped working, because that was a power clearly under her control, not a higher power. So she could no longer turn her decisions over to it. But Abrams really wanted to know to find, if possible, an understanding of God that was real, that she wouldn't have to reject as irrational. It would have to be a source of power and comfort, but she also wanted to feel coherent intellectually and emotionally and spiritually. She concluded that the question, does God exist, is useless. Rather, you have to start with what provably, observably does exist, and then ask, is there anything that actually exists in the universe that's worthy of being called God? And her answer is yes, that God does exist and matters immensely. And because I believe, as does Chris Hedges in our reading, that we are called to carry out the good insofar as we can determine what the good is. We do have to ask ourselves that question, what if, and choose what we believe to be good given all that we know, even with no certainty as to how that will turn out in the end. Hedges says that those who rebel against our civilization, breaking down as it is, require faith. So I suggest it's a worthy experiment too, as Abrams has written. Dare to try out this concept by moving in with all our furniture, to live inside it for a while, to test it and discover its implications, with the possibility of finding it transformational. So, it all starts with the scientific theory of emergence. Very simply put, with simple elements, new realities emerge with a higher level of complexity. And this is important, with a completely new identity, radically different from its constituent parts, so that this new whole is much more than and much different from the sum of its parts. As a simple example, no atom of your body is alive, but you're alive, a unique and conscious human being. And with apologies to Mr. Good, that's the only scientific thing you'll hear from me today. But we can easily observe this phenomenon in other scenarios. Let's talk about corporations. They're made up of the thoughts and opinions and achievement of many persons. But corporations are not persons, with apologies to the Supreme Court. Sorry, not sorry. They don't feel joy or pain. They have no beliefs, no compassion, even though presumably each individual who works for them does. And corporations have power. They have power. Another example is that large number of people trade goods and services for money, and that becomes a market, taking on a life of its own. And that market has power over our lives, determining prices, affecting the value of money. No one can reliably predict the outcomes. A market is a higher level of complexity than any of its participants fully understand. It arises from the collective ambitions, reason, action, opinions of vast numbers of people. And once the market has spoken, there's no appeal to a higher authority. And in this time of some sort of emerging political system, consider the media as a force. The media shapes our society. It's the internet, television, publications, radio, movies, social media, and all of them mutually reinforcing their impact. The media manipulates our politics, influences what we believe, shapes our emotions and desires, excites us, scares us, tells us how to raise our kids and where to spend our money. We are all right now staking our very lives on what we learn from the media. But what is the media? There's no there. It's not human, but it emerges from humans. And it's in this way, says Abrams, that something powerful and worthy of being called God has emerged from humans, from our highest aspirations. Almost everything that matters to our lives today, cooking, language, agriculture, technology, economics, science, education, art, religion, Each is an abstraction, each is very real, and each arose over time from the collective aspirations of our ancestors. Now, aspirations, they're different from mere desires for food, security, sex. Beyond our survival needs, we humans strive for something more. To feel happier, to act more creatively, to be safer, to avoid doing harm. This God is endlessly emerging from the enormous complexity of humanity's aspirations interacting over time. It's the guiding force of science. It's the desire. It's behind our desire for beauty and for love. And it has power in our lives when we try to imagine our participation in the universe and wonder what this emerging God might tell us if it could speak. What would it will us to do? It would speak for all of humanity, not for your favorite political party or for your country. Warning. A new reality that emerges from humans but takes on a life of its own doesn't always deserve to be called God. If we don't individually and collectively listen to this higher power to make sure it's really our best aspirations and not our survival fears guiding us, what can emerge instead are demonic forces. Also a new and different entity, uncontrollable by and possibly even unintended by any of its individual human parts. There's a scene from the movie Cabaret, some of you may know it, that chillingly demonstrates this. It takes place in pre-World War II Nazi Germany. Cliff, an American writer, and his decadent aristocratic friend Max are visiting a Berlin beer garden. As they talk, they're interrupted by a boy singing a haunting song with touching, inspirational lyrics. The sun on the meadow is summery warm. The stag in the forest runs free. But gather together to greet the storm. Tomorrow belongs to me. The song begins with a close-up of the boy's angelic face, only gradually moving the camera to reveal he's dressed in the uniform of the Hitler Youth. The boy's singing steadily grows more and more passionate. The babe in his cradle is closing his eyes. The blossom embraces the bee. But soon there's a whisper, arise, arise, tomorrow belongs to me. And the other customers at the beer garden start to join in, one by one, young and old, faces filled with determined hope. As more and more voices take up the song, it goes from feeling hopeful and optimistic to a tone that becomes ominous, threatening. Oh, fatherland, fatherland, show us the sign your children are waiting to see. The morning will come when the world is mine. Tomorrow belongs to me. The boy puts on his Hitler Youth cap and sings the ending with his arm in the Sieg Heil salute. Everyone is on their feet, singing, impassioned, except for one old man who declines to participate and instead watches with a heavy sadness. Max and Cliff get in their car and leave, saying to an official, "You still think you can control them?" Passionate yet unexamined shared aspirations can merge and morph into the demonic. Spirituality is the experience of connection to what you know to be real. As we're connected to our ancestors, to all that came before, even if we don't always know what that means, we know it's real. To practice esteem for our ancestors, even long, long ago and far away, gives us a sense of the continuity of life, and it also gives us some appreciation of what it took to get us here. Each of us is a miracle. The odds were infinitesimal beyond our wildest imaginations that any one of us is alive today. just one Neanderthal mating that didn't take place as it did. Maybe someone had a headache that night, and you and all your ancestors between now and then would never have existed, and who knows how that one small altered moment would have changed all of history. If we don't really live in that awareness with every breath we take, then we can't understand how what we do right now, every minute, changes everything. Changes the future. Helps to create God or demons. We are already ancestors, and the people of the future that we serve are very real. They're just not here yet. It's our connection to the future that gives our lives meaning. If somehow that connection were broken, life would lose its purpose. There is another movie scene that illustrates this, also chillingly. It's the final scene from the film Melancholia. The story revolves around a family facing the evolving awareness that a meteor is heading toward Earth, dead on track to destroy the world, and nothing can be done to change the inevitable. Now, you would think that this movie would be just over-the-top melodramatic, the characters overwhelmed by the terror of the situation, with loud, racing background music, gut-wrenching visual and sound effects, panic. But no, the filming and the acting are lovely, gentle, understated. And in the final scene, the two young women and the little boy, characters that we've come to know, gather on the horizon of their backyard to face the end together. There are no words, no music, no sound. They sit together on the ground in a small shelter of branches they've constructed, one silently watching the sky, one quietly sobbing, the child sitting with eyes closed, as the beautiful, ethereal-looking meteor looms quietly, even larger and larger in the background until it fills the screen and all goes silent in a flash of white. And that's it. The end. The ultimate end. Just silence. Over the following week, I found myself feeling an almost physical sense of despair whenever I unwittingly flashed back to that ending. Because it's about the utter annihilation of life as we know it, total disconnection from a future that will never be. And putting myself into that movie, knowing there's no possibility that I will live on in people's memory, or anything that I ever did will count for anything ever again. I knew that life's meaning would be gone. We who are alive right now are connected to our ancestors. We are ancestors, and we can only hope our descendants will find us worthy of gratitude. We are all co-creators of this God whose existence depends very much on us in every action that we take or fail to take. When we make decisions for ourselves or our families or our communities, when we choose what we must believe to be the best possible outcome and do our part to help bring it into existence. In the words of theologian Michael Benedict, let us stop competing with each other to compose dizzying encomiums to God's cosmic creativity, eternity, wisdom, and might, shadows of kingship all, and embrace instead the humbler truth at hand, that divinity is evidenced, indeed constituted, not by how the stars twirl or how life began, but by how graciously we step forward into the next moment. Let's rise now and sing of how we create this new world together. Hymn number 298. Wake now, my Sibses. Our time together this morning is coming to a close, and although we extinguish the chalice flame, the warmth of love, hope, and shared community will travel with us from this shared silence into our often noisy world. We hold this warmth close, trusting that compassion and justice will walk with us into our daily lives, and like the cairn, show us the way back to this place where possibilities are born.
I just wanted to say. Situation. We got to decide Come on, Bill. Well, Sam.
Yeah, I have a feeling about that.
Thank you very much. No, real time like when
I lost track of the meter at one point and came in out at note late and kind of wobbled some words. Yeah. I did want to say to people, yeah, I'm just learning this. Oh, no. This song, go ahead, hold over. This song too. Oh, well, thank you.
What happens with the doctor's Go wash my hands. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah, I was there first, they told us that. Yeah. I mean. So I watched it all down in the machine.
The interesting thing is, Bill found someplace that said silk and water require the outer coating of the coronavirus.
And water.
Yeah.
Yeah, but buy Purell anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, buy stock in Purell.
Yeah. Well, you know,
I was listening to a guy,
when I was listening to a guy who's been in Europe recently, and he knows he works, does work in Milan. And you know, when they initially started the voluntary isolation, where they call it, that they said, okay, these two trumps have quarantine. Yes, they left. And they went to other parts of Italy and spread the virus. And so the government figured out what was going on. And said, the whole country. And if they're caught outside proper authorization, you're going to jail for 3 months. So you can sit in your house for a month, or you can go to prison for 3 years.
Now life is great. I was thinking like I would just drive in a car, he could live in the apartment, or such a dodge, what she did with that.
Yeah, I plugged it in, it's been charged home. Yeah. Mobile service, but I realized this. But it is working. I love it.
my thoughts have been rattling around like crazy.
Oh, wow, that's still live stream. Well, if anybody is still on the live stream, we left that running a little longer than we meant to. Actually, I see that 5 of you are still logged into the live stream. Service has concluded, and we'll see you soon.